Another word about being FBI, and I'll make sure your night gets a lot worse. Understood? Lieutenant Donnie Parvin's voice drifted above him, thick with contempt. His boot pressed into Matteo Dashner's back, grinding his cheek against the cold hardwood floor of his own living room. Matteo didn't struggle or raise his voice. 15 years of federal training held him perfectly still, as unfamiliar hands tore through every corner of the home he had earned. In the doorway, he caught sight of his father being held back by an officer, watching the scene in silent fury. What Parvin didn't know was that only a few feet away, locked inside a bedroom closet, sat a badge that was about to destroy every career in that room. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The clock on the microwave read 11:47 p.m. Matteo Dashner dropped his keys on the kitchen counter and let out a long, slow breath. His shoulders were tight. His eyes burned. He had been on his feet for 14 hours straight, moving through shadows, watching, waiting, saying nothing, the way the job demanded. The undercover work didn't let you rest. Not really. Even when the shift ended, your mind kept running. He rolled his neck until it cracked, then pulled open the cabinet above the stove. The bourbon was almost gone, just enough for 2 fingers. He poured it into a short glass and didn't bother with ice. His house was quiet. That was the thing he loved most about it. Small, yes, nothing fancy. But it was his. A neat brick home on a clean street in Pinewood Estates, a neighborhood where people mowed their lawns on Saturdays and knew each other's names. His father, Joshua, lived right next door, separated only by a shared wall and a connecting door that was never fully locked. Matteo could hear the old man's television through the plaster if he listened hard enough. Some nights, that sound was the most comforting thing in the world. He loosened the laces on his sneakers without untying them and kicked them off near the door. His white T-shirt had a small grease stain near the hem from a fast food run he'd made during surveillance. His gray sweatpants had seen better days. He looked nothing like what he was. That was the point. That was always the point. His FBI credentials and his service weapon were locked in the safe in his bedroom closet, right where protocol said they needed to be when you were running deep cover. You didn't carry your real identity into the field. You left it somewhere safe, and you became someone else until the work was done. He settled into the armchair by the window. He took the first sip of bourbon. He closed his eyes. 6 minutes later, his front door came off its hinges. The sound was like a thunderclap inside a small box. An explosion of wood and metal and shouting that hit him before he could even process what was happening. The glass fell from his hand. He was on his feet for half a second, just half a second, and then 4 men in tactical gear were on him like a wave. Big hands grabbed his arms. His feet left the ground. He came down hard onto the floor, face pressed against the cold hardwood, a knee driving into the back of his neck with a weight that made it difficult to breathe. "Don't move! Don't you move!" He didn't move. He knew better. 15 years of training. 15 years of watching how these situations could go sideways in under a second. And that was before you factored in the color of his skin. He had seen what happened when black men moved, when they flinched, when they so much as raised their voice. He had seen it in case files and crime scenes and courtrooms. He had seen it up close. So he didn't move. He stayed still and he breathed, and he tried to stay somewhere calm inside his own head while the room erupted around him. Through the wall, through the thin plaster that separated his life from his father's, he heard Joshua shout, a sharp, startled sound, full of fear. The sound a 78-year-old man makes when something terrible breaks the silence of a quiet night. "Don't come in here, Pop," Matteo thought. "Please, don't come in here." The officers were moving through the house now. He could hear them. Boots on tile, hands yanking open cabinets, the clatter of his kitchen being pulled apart. Someone knocked his coffee mug off the counter. It shattered on the floor. And then the footsteps slowed. One set, unhurried. Like whoever it was had nowhere else to be and all the time in the world. Matteo turned his head just enough to see a pair of polished boots stop 2 feet from his face. Latour Donny Parvin looked down at him the way a man looks at something he stepped in. He was broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with cold gray eyes that held no curiosity, only contempt. He didn't crouch down. He didn't need to. The power in the room was entirely his, and he knew it. He let the silence sit for a moment. Then he said, "Stop playing dumb. We got a tip. You've been running drugs out of this house." He glanced slowly around the room, like he was already bored. "The neighborhood's been complaining about you for months." The knee pressed harder into Matteo's neck. He said nothing. Not yet. The hardwood was cold against his cheek. Matteo could feel every grain of it, could feel the weight of the knee on the back of his neck, the pressure building behind his eyes, the way his arms were pinned at an angle that would start to hurt in about another 30 seconds. He catalogued all of it the way he had been trained to, quietly, without panic. And then he set it aside. Panic was a luxury he could not afford. "Get him up," Parvin said to no one in particular, already moving toward the kitchen. 2 officers hauled Matteo to his feet like he was luggage. They kept his arms twisted behind him. One of them was young, maybe mid-20s, with a tight jaw and eyes that hadn't quite settled into cruelty yet. His name tag said Horan. He wasn't rough about it. Matteo noticed that. "I'd like to stand on my own," Matteo said. His voice was level, quiet, the voice of a man who had sat across the table from killers and never once let them see him sweat. Parvin turned around slowly. He looked at Matteo like the words had been spoken in a foreign language. "You'd like to what?" "Stand on my own. I'm not resisting. I'm not a threat. I am standing in my own home, and I would like to stand without being held." Parvin stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "You'll stand how I tell you to stand." Matteo said nothing. He let the silence absorb it. Then he tried again. "I need to retrieve my identification. It's in the bedroom closet. 2nd shelf, black bifold case. If one of your officers would—" "You'll get your ID at the station." Parvin turned back to the kitchen. "Search the back rooms." "Sir?" "I said you'll get it at the station." Matteo turned his head. Slowly, deliberately. He found the body camera clipped to Officer Horan's chest, and he looked directly into it. He spoke each word like he was setting it in stone. "My name is Matteo Dashner. I am a senior special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My credentials are in the bedroom closet, 2nd shelf, in a black bifold case. I am formally requesting that an officer retrieve them." The room shifted. Not much, but enough. 2 officers glanced at each other. Horan's grip on Matteo's arm loosened by a fraction. Parvin crossed the room in 4 steps. He got close. Close enough that Matteo could smell the coffee on his breath. His voice dropped low, below the range of the body cameras, below the noise of the search, and his eyes went hard and flat. "You say one more word about being FBI," he said slowly, "and I will add obstruction and filing a false report to whatever else you've got coming tonight. You hear me? Not another word." He held the stare for 3 full seconds. Then he stepped back, casual as anything, and called out to the officers in the hallway. "Keep moving." Matteo breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth. The anger was there. It was always there, a heat sitting low in his chest. But he had learned a long time ago to keep it on a leash. Anger made you sloppy. Anger made you say things you couldn't take back. He needed every word he spoke tonight to be something he could use later. The sound of the connecting door stopped everything. It opened slowly. Joshua Dashner filled the frame in his pajamas, blue flannel, worn soft, the ones he'd owned for a decade. He was 78 years old, and he looked every year of it right now, his face tight with the kind of fear that fathers carry. His eyes swept the room and found Matteo immediately. An officer moved to block him. "Sir, you need to go back. That is my son." Joshua's voice was low and clear. "Sir, that is my son." He didn't push forward. He didn't raise his hands. He simply stopped moving and stayed in the doorway. His eyes locked on Matteo with an expression that Matteo had seen exactly once before. At his mother's funeral, when Joshua had stood at the graveside and refused to look away from the casket until the very last moment. Like if he kept watching, nothing worse could happen. Matteo looked at his father's face, the fear in it, the helplessness, the fury that a man learns to swallow after 78 years of practice. And something inside Matteo Dashner went very quiet and very sharp. He stopped waiting. He started thinking. The search was turning up nothing. Matteo could hear it, the frustration building in the back rooms, the sound of drawers being yanked open and shoved closed, closets checked and rechecked. 15 minutes in, and they had found exactly what Matteo knew they would find. Nothing. No drugs. No paraphernalia. No evidence of anything except a man who lived alone and kept a clean house. The energy in the room was shifting. 2 of the 4 officers had drifted toward the hallway, their attention pulled by the search. The grip on Matteo's arms had loosened. Not released, but loosened. The way a man's hand loosens when his mind is somewhere else. Parvin was blocking Joshua in the doorway, his back half turned, keeping the old man from entering with a combination of his body and his silence. Matteo watched. He calculated. He waited for the exact right moment. Then he spoke, loudly, clearly, directly into the body camera on Horan's chest. "I'm going to reach into my pocket. Every word deliberate, every word on record. I am not reaching for a weapon. I am retrieving my cell phone. I want that documented." Parvin spun around instantly. "You don't reach for anything. It is a cell phone, in my left front pocket. Your officer can retrieve it himself if that makes it easier." Matteo kept his eyes on the camera. "But one way or another, I am starting a recording. Right now." The room hesitated. It was Horan who moved first, stepping forward, patting the pocket Matteo had indicated, feeling the flat rectangle of the phone through the fabric. He pulled it out. Plain black phone, cracked screen protector, no case. He held it up toward Parvin. Parvin stared at it. Something moved behind his eyes, the calculation of a man deciding whether confiscating the phone would look worse than allowing it. He jerked his chin. A grudging half-nod. Horan handed the phone to Matteo. Matteo pressed record, held the phone at his side with 2 fingers, screen facing outward. Then he looked at Parvin and said it again. Steadier this time. Final. "I am a senior special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My credentials are in the bedroom closet. Second shelf. Black bifold case. I am asking you to retrieve them." Parvin crossed the room in 4 steps. He got close enough that Matteo could feel the heat of him, smell the stale coffee on his breath. His voice dropped below the level of the cameras. "You want to run that FBI story one more time? Be my guest. I'll add obstruction and filing a false report to your charges before you finish the sentence." His eyes were flat and certain. "Nobody here believes you. Nobody out there is going to believe you. So do yourself a favor and shut your mouth until we get to the station." He held the stare. Let it land. Then he stepped back and turned away, already dismissing Matteo. already moving on. The way men like Parvin moved on when they were sure they had won. Matteo looked at Joshua. His father's jaw was clenched so tight the muscle jumped beneath his ear. "The bedroom closet," Matteo said again. "To the room, to the cameras, to the record. Second shelf, black bifold case." Horan looked at Parvin's back. Then he looked at Matteo. Then he made the kind of decision that cannot be unmade. He walked to the bedroom. It was quiet for about 15 seconds. Then it went quieter. When Horan came back into the living room, he was holding the open bifold case, and his face had changed completely. "Lieutenant," his voice came out strange, stripped of everything. "You need to see this." Parvin turned with the slow irritation of a man who does not like being interrupted. He looked at what Horan was holding, and he went still. Matteo held out his hand. Horan placed the case in it without a word. Matteo held it up. Open. Steady. The gold badge caught the overhead light. Senior Special Agent, Matteo L. Dashner. 15 years of service. Violent Crimes and Major Offenses Division. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The photograph matched the man standing in front of them exactly. Nobody moved. Then Matteo took one step forward, toward the closet, toward the bedroom, toward the back of the house, and one of the officers behind him made a sound. A sharp exhale, a boot scraping the floor. From the corner of his eye, Matteo saw a hand drop to a holster. He stopped moving immediately. "I am not going anywhere," Matteo said quietly, to that officer specifically. "I am standing still. Look at the badge." The hand lifted away from the holster. The room breathed again. The knee that had been on his neck was gone. The hands on his arms were gone. The contempt that had filled every corner of Donnie Parvin's face had drained out of it like water through a crack, replaced by something he clearly had no practice managing. Matteo closed the case, straightened to his full height, rolled his shoulders back, smoothed the front of his white T-shirt, slow, deliberate, and looked at Donnie Parvin with the steady eyes of a man who has never once stopped being exactly who he is. He didn't raise his voice. "Get out of my house." Parvin's mouth opened. What came out was the sound of a man building a wall out of wet sand. Something about an anonymous tip. Something about standard procedure. Something about no hard feelings, in a tone that had completely abandoned every trace of its earlier authority. He almost sounded reasonable. Almost sounded professional. Like if he kept talking, he could smooth the last 20 minutes into something manageable. Matteo set his still-recording phone on the kitchen table and looked at Parvin, then at each body camera in the room, one by one. "I know what standard procedure looks like. I've watched it up close for 15 years. What happened tonight, wasn't it?" A pause. "I'll be in touch." Parvin held the stare one beat too long. Then he walked out. The room emptied fast, the way rooms empty when everyone in them understands, all at once, that something has gone very wrong and cannot be undone. Cold October air pushed through the shattered doorframe. Horan was last. He stopped at the threshold, didn't turn around. His shoulders were rigid, his hands loose at his sides, and he stood in the wreckage of the doorframe for just a moment. "I'm sorry, sir," he said quietly. Then he was gone. Joshua crossed the room and put both hands on his son's shoulders, the same way he had when Matteo was a boy, and the world had done something that needed to be stood through together. They stood in the cold and the quiet. Neither spoke. Some things didn't need words. Not yet. Matteo didn't sleep. He sat at Joshua's kitchen table until the sky outside went from black to gray, to the pale, washed-out blue of early morning. Joshua had made coffee somewhere around 3 a.m., and neither of them had talked much. They didn't need to. The plywood nailed over the front door frame said everything that needed saying. A jagged rectangle of pressed wood, where a solid door used to be, the edges still showing raw wood splinters from the ram. Every time Matteo looked at it, something tightened in his chest. At 7 in the morning, he picked up his phone and called Desiree Rashner. She answered on the second ring. That meant she already knew. Word traveled fast inside the bureau, especially when one of your senior field agents spent a night face down on his own floor. Matteo. Her voice was careful in the particular way that told him she had been thinking about what to say before he called. I need to file a formal complaint, he said, through internal channels, against Lieutenant Donnie Parvin and the Crestwood Police Department. What happened last night was a civil rights violation, Desiree. It was racial profiling, unlawful entry, and excessive force, and I have it on video. I know. A pause. I need you to come in. The field office was 40 minutes away. Matteo drove in the same gray sweatpants and white t-shirt he'd been wearing when the door came down. He hadn't gone back to change. Some part of him wanted Desiree to see exactly what the night had looked like. She met him in her office, a corner room on the 4th floor with 2 windows and a wall of files. Desiree Rashner was 55, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of posture that came from spending 3 decades in rooms where you had to hold your ground. She was the best boss Matteo had ever had. She was also, right now, the person about to say something he did not want to hear. She let him sit down first. She poured him coffee. Then she folded her hands on the desk and looked at him directly, the way she always did when the news was bad. Desiree didn't ease into things. She said them clean. The complaint creates a jurisdictional problem. Matteo looked at her. The trafficking operation, she said. We are 14 months in, Matteo. The network has 3 confirmed connections to Crestwood City politics. If your name goes into a public misconduct filing right now, if your identity as a federal agent gets attached to an incident in that neighborhood, the targets will know we have a presence there. They will move. Everything we have built disappears overnight. The office was very quiet. I'm not asking you to drop it, Desiree said. I want to be clear about that. What happened to you last night was wrong, and it will be addressed. She paused. I am asking you to wait. 60 days. Give us 60 days to close this operation out. Then we bring the full weight of the Bureau down on Crestwood PD, and we do it properly. Matteo sat with that for a moment. 60 days. 2 months of watching Parvin walk around in his uniform like nothing happened. 2 months of Harmon constructing whatever story he was already building. 2 months of his front door being a piece of plywood, while the men who put it there collected their paychecks. He understood what Desiree was really asking. She was asking him to be professional, to be patient, to put the mission above himself the way he had been doing for 15 years. He understood it. He hated it. 60 days, he said. Desiree held his gaze. I'm sorry, Matteo. I mean that. He nodded once, stood up, picked up his coffee and finished it standing, looking out the window at the parking lot 4 floors below. Thank you for seeing me, he said. He drove back to Joshua's house and walked through the front door, through the gap in the plywood, which Joshua had propped against the wall to let the morning light in. Joshua was at the stove, scrambling eggs, and he turned when Matteo came in and read his son's face the way only a father can. Well, Joshua said. Matteo looked at the plywood leaning against the wall, at the empty doorframe, at the clean rectangle of pale October sky where a solid door used to keep the world out. I'm going back to work, Matteo said. Both jobs. Joshua set down the spatula. He nodded slowly. The nod of a man who understood exactly what that meant, and was not going to try to talk his son out of it. Then you better eat first, he said, and turned back to the stove. The call came at 2:14 in the afternoon. Mateo was at his kitchen table, the plywood still over the doorframe, his case files spread in front of him, when his personal cell rang with a number he didn't recognize, a 404 area code. Local. He answered on the third ring. "It's Horan." The voice was low, tight, the voice of a man calling from somewhere he wasn't supposed to be calling from. "I'm on my personal phone. I've got maybe 10 minutes. Mateo closed the folder in front of him. He stood up and moved to the window. "I'm listening," he said. A breath on the other end. Like Horan was deciding, even now, whether to do this. Then he did it. "There was no tip," Horan said. There was never a tip. The whole thing was fabricated. The October sun was sitting low over the rooftops of Pinewood Estates. A kid was riding a bicycle up the block. Everything outside looked completely ordinary. "Tell me exactly what you know," Mateo said. Horan talked fast and quiet. A few months back, a man named Glenn Wandel, Mateo's next-door neighbor on the east side, had filed a formal noise complaint against Parvin. Something about Parvin's personal vehicle parking in front of his house during off hours, music running, Parvin showing up drunk on one occasion, and getting hostile when Glenn asked him to move. Glenn had filed the complaint through the city's online system. It was all documented. Parvin had found out. Somebody inside the department, Horan didn't know who, didn't want to know, had gone into the police database and deliberately miskeyed the address associated with Glenn Wandel's file. Changed it from Glenn's address to Mateo's. Made it look, in the system, like the complaints were coming from Mateo's house. Then Parvin used that corrupted entry to justify a tip. Built the whole raid on top of a lie that was sitting right there in the database, official and time-stamped and totally fabricated. Mateo stood very still at the window. "That's not all," Horan said. Of course it wasn't. Horan's voice dropped even lower. Chief Russell Harmon had called an internal meeting that morning. Quiet. Off the books. Horan hadn't been invited, but a friend inside the department had told him what was discussed. Harmon was already building a counter-narrative. The story being constructed, carefully, piece by piece, was that Mateo had been aggressive and uncooperative during what was described as a routine welfare check, that the officers had shown admirable restraint in the face of a hostile subject, that the FBI badge had not been immediately visible and could not have been reasonably identified in the low-light conditions of the home. "He's already talked to the city attorney," Horan said, "and 2 council members. He's moving fast, Mr. Dashner." Mateo's jaw tightened. Harmon wasn't reacting. He was preempting, laying the groundwork before Mateo could get his version of events into any official record. Every day that passed was a day Harmon used to make the lie look more like the truth. "Horan," Mateo kept his voice even, "what you just did took guts. I want you to know I understand that." Silence on the other end. Then, "I've got a 2-year-old daughter, Mr. Dashner." A pause. "I keep thinking about her watching that video someday. What I would say to her about it." Another pause. "I couldn't come up with anything good." Mateo closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he opened them. "Keep your head down," he said. "Don't do anything that gives them a reason to come after you. And don't call this number again from a phone that can be traced back to your department. Understood?" A beat. "I'm sorry I didn't." "You're helping now," Mateo said. "That counts." The line went dead. Mateo stood at the window a moment longer. Then he walked to Joshua's side of the house through the connecting door. His father was sitting at the kitchen table with his afternoon coffee, and the newspaper he read every day cover to cover, the same way he had for 40 years. Mateo sat down across from him. He laid out everything Horan had told him. The fabricated tip, the database manipulation, the neighbor's complaint, Harmon's meeting, the narrative already being constructed to bury him. Joshua listened without interrupting. He set his coffee cup down slowly when Matteo finished. He looked at his son across the table with the calm, steady eyes of a man who had spent 78 years watching the world do exactly this kind of thing and surviving it every single time. "Baby," Joshua said quietly. The badge got their attention. He folded his hands on the table. Now it's time to get their future. The next morning, Matteo went back to work. Both jobs. By day, he was still the man nobody looked twice at. Plain clothes, beat-up car, blending into the background of Crestwood streets, while the trafficking operation moved through its final critical phase. He showed up. He did the work. He kept his face neutral and his mind sharp, and he gave the operation everything it required. 14 months was too long and too important to let personal business bleed into professional judgment. But the nights belonged to something else entirely. He started with what he could control. The morning after Horan's call, Matteo sat at his kitchen table with a fresh legal pad and wrote 3 words at the top of the first page. He underlined them twice. 3 pressure points. The first was the body camera footage. There were at least 4 cameras running in his house that night. 4 separate recordings of everything Parvin said. Everything the officers did. Every second from the moment the door came down to the moment Horan apologized in the doorway. That footage existed. It was sitting in the Crestwood PD evidence system right now. Matteo filed a FOIA request for all of it the same afternoon. Clean, formal, by the book. 2 days later, the department's response came back in a single sentence. The requested materials were part of an ongoing internal review and could not be released at this time. Matteo filed again, this time with the help of attorney Kimberly Bramble, a 38-year-old civil rights attorney whose name had come to him through a contact at the Bureau's legal division. Kimberly was sharp and fast and had spent the last decade fighting exactly this kind of institutional stonewalling. She took one look at the department's response letter and called it what it was. "They're stalling," she told Matteo over the phone. "They know what's on those cameras. We'll go around them." The second pressure point was Parvin's history. Through a series of careful conversations with Horan, always on clean phones, always brief, Matteo built a picture of the man that was worse than he had expected. 7 misconduct complaints over 16 years. 7. Excessive force. Unlawful entry. Intimidation of a witness. Targeting of a black resident during a traffic stop that resulted in a broken wrist and a story that never made it past Harmon's desk. Every single complaint had been reviewed internally. Every single one had been closed without action. Harmon hadn't just protected Parvin. He had preserved him, kept him operational, kept him loyal, kept him available for exactly the kind of work that needed doing and couldn't be officially sanctioned. Matteo began finding the complainants. He visited them in the evenings after the undercover work was done. He knocked on doors in the quiet hours and introduced himself and listened. A 67-year-old grandmother in the Eastwood district who had filed a complaint after Parvin pushed her son against a patrol car hard enough to crack 2 ribs. A 44-year-old mechanic whose shop Parvin had raided on a fabricated tip, sound familiar, and who had spent 3 months trying to get someone at the department to return his calls. A retired schoolteacher who had documented everything and been told her documentation didn't meet the threshold for investigation. Matteo sat in their living rooms and he listened to every word. He took careful notes. He did not make promises he couldn't keep. He told each of them the same thing. "I hear you. What happened to you mattered. And I need you to be willing to say it out loud when the time comes." Most of them said yes. The third pressure point was the database manipulation itself. Using his federal access, carefully, within the boundaries of what his credentials permitted, Matteo began tracing the data entry that had placed his address in the system where Glenn Wandle's address should have been. The digital footprint was there. It was always there, if you knew where to look. A timestamp, a terminal ID, a login credential attached to a specific user account inside the Crestwood PD system. Someone had sat down at a keyboard and deliberately typed the wrong address. And that person had logged in first. Matteo circled the login ID on his legal pad and stared at it for a long time. He drove home late each night through quiet streets. He walked through what used to be his front door. The plywood was holding. Joshua had reinforced it with a second crossbeam. And he sat at the kitchen table with his notes spread around him, and he built the case the same way he had built every case in 15 years of federal work. Brick by brick, patient and relentless. The door could wait. Justice couldn't. Matteo heard about the council meeting from Kimberly. She called him on a Thursday evening, about a week after the raid, while he was parked 2 blocks from a surveillance point, still in his cover clothes, still in character. Her voice had the tight-clipped quality it got when she was angry and trying to stay professional about it. "Harmon spoke tonight," she said. "City council meeting. You need to see it." He watched the recording at Joshua's kitchen table after midnight on his laptop, with the sound low. Joshua sat across from him with his coffee, reading glasses on, leaning forward slightly to see the screen. Chief Russell Harmon walked to the podium at the front of the council chamber like a man arriving at a dinner party he had hosted 100 times before. He was 61, silver-haired, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had learned a long time ago how to look trustworthy. He wore his full dress uniform, every button polished, every crease sharp. He set his notes on the podium, looked out at the assembled council members with practiced calm, and began. "I want to address an incident that occurred in the Pinewood Estates neighborhood approximately 1 week ago," he said. "Our officers responded to information suggesting a possible narcotics situation at a residential address. They conducted a welfare check in accordance with standard protocol. During the course of that check, there was a communication breakdown between our team and the resident, a breakdown that unfortunately resulted in some property damage." He paused. "Let that settle. I want to be clear. Our officers acted with professionalism and restraint throughout the encounter. The moment the situation was clarified, they acted accordingly. We deeply regret any distress caused to the resident, and we have launched a full internal review to ensure our protocols are being followed correctly going forward." He gathered his notes. He nodded at the council. He stepped away from the podium. That was it. No names, no specifics. No mention of a federal agent thrown to the floor of his own home, no mention of a knee on a neck, no mention of a fabricated tip or a manipulated database or an elderly man blocked in a doorway in his pajamas. Just communication breakdown and property damage and full internal review. 3 phrases that together added up to exactly nothing. 2 council members nodded along. One of them, a heavy-set man in a gray suit whose name Matteo didn't recognize, actually wrote something down, like Harmon had said something worth recording. Matteo stared at the screen for a long moment after the recording ended. Joshua took off his reading glasses and set them on the table. "Slick," Joshua said. It wasn't a compliment. The next morning, Matteo walked to the end of the driveway in the gray October light and picked up the local paper from where it had landed in the wet grass. He stood there in the cold and read the front page of the Metro section. Crestwood PD addresses. Incident. Cites communication breakdown. The article ran 4 paragraphs. It quoted Harmon directly, the same language from the council meeting, reproduced faithfully, unchallenged. It described the event as a welfare check that resulted in property damage. It noted that an internal review had been launched. It did not name Matteo. It did not mention the FBI. It did not include a single quote from anyone other than Harmon, and a brief statement from the city attorney describing the department's response as thorough and appropriate. 4 paragraphs. Clean, contained, controlled. Matthew read it twice. Then he folded the newspaper along its original crease, neat and precise, and walked back inside through the plywood doorframe. Joshua was at the stove. He turned when Mateo came in, read his son's face, and waited. Mateo set the folded newspaper on the kitchen table. He smoothed it flat with the back of his hand. He looked at it for one more moment, at the headline, at the careful language, at the shape of a lie dressed up in professional courtesy and printed in black ink for the whole city to read. Then he pulled out his chair and sat down. "Good," he said quietly. Joshua raised an eyebrow. Mateo looked up at his father. Something behind his eyes had gone very still and very focused. The look Joshua had seen once before, years ago, when Mateo had described closing his first major case. The look of a man who had just understood exactly where the door was. "Let them think they've handled it," Mateo said. Joshua turned back to the stove without a word. He was smiling. 3 days after Harmon's council appearance, Kimberly Bramble called Mateo at 7 in the morning. He knew from the first second that something was wrong. Kimberly was the kind of person who led with information. Sharp, direct, no preamble. But this call started with silence. A full 3 seconds of it before she spoke. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to hear me out, before you respond." Mateo set down his coffee. "Go ahead." The night before, a senior partner at her firm had called her into his office after hours. His name was Bradford Ellis. 60 years old, 3rd-generation Crestwood. The kind of man whose family had a building named after them downtown. He had sat behind his desk and told Kimberly, in the careful language of men who never say anything they can be quoted on, that her involvement in Mateo's case was creating friction with certain relationships the firm had cultivated over many years, that the timing was inconvenient, that perhaps a more experienced attorney, someone with more distance from the situation, might serve the client better. "He told me to step back," Kimberly said. Those were his exact words. "Step back." "What did you tell him?" Another pause. "I told him I needed the weekend to think about it." A breath. "I hate that I said that. I hate that I didn't just tell him no right there. But Mateo, if I lose this position—" "Kimberly." Mateo kept his voice steady. "You've got until Monday. I'll find backup either way. Whatever you decide, I understand it." She said she was sorry. He told her not to be. He meant it. Harmon had just told him exactly how far his reach extended. All the way into a private law firm. All the way into the career calculations of a 38-year-old woman trying to do the right thing. That was useful information. He had barely ended the call when his phone rang again. "Horan." "They transferred me." His voice was thin, shaking at the edges. "Overnight shifts. Far East Patrol Zone. Effective tomorrow." A pause. "Nobody gets transferred to the East Zone overnight on 3 days' notice, Mr. Dashner. Nobody. That's where they send you when they want you gone but can't fire you yet." Mateo stood up and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet. A neighbor was backing out of her driveway, completely unaware that 2 separate people had called him in the last 20 minutes to tell him the walls were closing in. "Listen to me carefully," Mateo said. "You do not quit. You show up for every shift. You keep your head down and your mouth shut, and you stay inside that building. I need you inside that building, Horan. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." A beat. "They're watching me. I can feel it." "I know. Keep your head down." He hung up and stood at the window for a long moment. Harmon was efficient. That was the thing Mateo kept coming back to. The man didn't panic, didn't overreact. He applied pressure surgically, in exactly the right places. with exactly the right amount of force. A quiet word to a law firm partner here. A punitive transfer there. Small moves that left no fingerprints and sent very clear messages. The radio hit him that afternoon. He was driving back from a surveillance point when it came through the speakers of his car. A local AM station, conservative talk format, the kind of programming that ran in the background of every diner and waiting room in Crestwood. The host's name was Don Tanner. Matteo had heard the name before, but never paid him much attention. He paid attention now. Tanner was reading from what he described as a source close to the Crestwood PD, summarizing the incident in Pinewood Estates, the welfare check, the communication breakdown, and then the new addition, the part that made Matteo's hands tighten on the steering wheel, a narrative about a resident who had become immediately hostile, who had made claims about his identity that complicated the officer's response, who had recorded the encounter on his phone in a way that suggested the hostility was premeditated. Premeditated. The officers, Tanner said, had shown remarkable restraint. Matteo turned the radio off. He drove the rest of the way home in silence. The phone was ringing when he walked through the plywood doorframe. He looked at the screen. Stella. His daughter's voice came through small and tight, the voice she used when she was trying not to cry and almost succeeding. Daddy? A breath. Are you okay? People at school are talking about it. It's on social media. Are they going to do something to you? Matteo sat down on the edge of his armchair and told his daughter the truth. Not all of it. Not the parts about the trafficking operation or Harmon's counter-narrative or Horan's transfer, but the part that mattered most. The part Stella needed to hear from her father's mouth before she heard a worse version of it from someone else. He told her what happened the night the door came down. He told her he had handled it. He told her the people responsible were going to face consequences, real ones, not the kind that got buried in an internal review and filed away where nobody could find them. Stella was quiet for a long moment after he finished. Daddy, she said, they put you on the floor. They did. In your own house. Yes. Another silence. He could hear her breathing. The careful, controlled breathing of a young woman holding something together by sheer force of will. She had grown up watching her father be exceptional at everything he did, watching him move through the world with a quiet dignity that made people take notice. And someone had put him on the floor of his own home. Are you angry? She asked. Matteo looked at the plywood over the doorframe, at the raw wood edges, at the pale rectangle of evening sky beyond it. Yes, he said. I am. Good, Stella said. Her voice had steadied. Don't let them make it into something else. I won't, baby. I promise. After the call ended, Matteo sat without moving for a few minutes. The house was quiet. The street outside was quiet. He sat in the stillness and let himself feel the full weight of it. The anger, the exhaustion, the particular kind of pain that comes from being disbelieved in your own home. And then he set it all carefully aside. He picked up his legal pad. He got back to work. 2 days later, on a Sunday afternoon, someone knocked on Joshua's door. Matteo was at the kitchen table when Joshua answered it. He heard voices in the front room. Joshua's low and warm, the other voice a woman's, unhurried and certain, with the particular quality of someone who had been the most formidable person in every room she'd ever entered, and had long since stopped needing to announce it. Ida Mae Tompkins walked into the kitchen carrying a manila folder thick enough to stand on its own. She was 71 years old, small and straight-backed, with close-cropped white hair and eyes that were sharp enough to cut glass. She wore a navy blazer over a plain white shirt, and she moved like someone who had places to be, and had already decided this was the most important one. She sat down across from Matteo without waiting to be invited, set the folder on the table, folded her hands on top of it. "My name is Ida Mae Tompkins," she said. "You already know that. A mutual friend told you I was coming." She studied his face for a moment with those sharp eyes. "I've been watching Russell Harmon for 7 years. I've been waiting for the thread that unravels him." She tapped the folder once with one finger. "You're the thread." Mateo looked at the folder, then at her. "I'm listening," he said. She opened it. What was inside had been assembled with the patience and precision of a woman who had spent 4 decades practicing law before spending the last 7 years on the Crestwood City Council. Community testimony going back 5 years, residents, mostly black, who had been on the receiving end of Harmon's department and had nowhere to take their stories. Budget irregularities in the department's discretionary fund. Small amounts, moved quietly. The kind of thing that only looked like something if you knew what you were looking for. Internal correspondence suggesting that Harmon had personally reviewed and personally closed 3 misconduct complaints that should have gone to the City Oversight Board. And then, near the bottom of the folder, a single sheet of paper with a name on it. Former City Councilman Arthur Warner, 68 years old, retired. He had sat on the Council's Public Safety Subcommittee 4 years ago, during a review of a misconduct complaint that had gotten further than most. He had received a personal visit from Russell Harmon. 2 days later, he had voted to close the review. Arthur Warner was willing to talk. On record. Under oath, if necessary. Ida Mae watched Mateo read through it all. When he looked up, she said the words that had been building in her for 7 years. "I've been waiting for someone like you." Joshua appeared in the doorway with 3 cups of coffee. He set them on the table without a word. One in front of Ida Mae, one in front of Mateo, one at his own place. Then he sat down. 3 people. 1 table. 1 open folder between them. The real work was about to begin. The Sunshine Law petition took 11 days. Kimberly had come back on Monday morning. She had chosen to stay on the case. Bradford Ellis be damned. And she had filed the state petition herself, citing the department's repeated FOIA stonewalling as obstruction of a legitimate public records request. The petition went to a circuit court judge who had no political ties to Harmon, no history with Crestwood PD, and no patience for bureaucratic delays. He granted it in 4 days. The body camera footage arrived in Kimberly's inbox on a Friday afternoon in a compressed file that she forwarded to Mateo without a word of commentary. She didn't need to say anything. The footage said everything. Mateo watched all 4 recordings back to back, alone at his kitchen table, in the quiet of a Tuesday night. He watched himself get thrown to the floor. He watched the knee go down. He watched Parvin crouch close and threaten him in a voice just below the camera's range. Just below, but not quite under it. He watched Joshua get blocked in the doorway. He watched Horan find the badge and hold it up, and watched Parvin's face in the moment that followed. He watched it all the way through twice. Then he closed the laptop and sat in the silence for a long time. Over the following 2 weeks, the case came together piece by piece, with the momentum of something that had been building for a long time and had finally found its slope. The database records came through Mattheo's federal access, a clean, documented trail showing the exact timestamp and login ID attached to the address manipulation. 6 of Parvin's prior complainants had agreed to give sworn statements. Kimberly prepared each one with the precision of a woman who understood exactly what was at stake. Former Councilman Arthur Warner sat down with Ida Mae for 3 hours on a Wednesday evening and said everything on record that he had been holding back for 4 years. Mateo's own recording, every second from the moment the door came down, had been authenticated and preserved. It was enough. It was more than enough. On a Thursday evening, Mateo and Ida Mae sat across from each other at Joshua's kitchen table with the full case spread between them. Every document, every statement, every piece of evidence arranged in order, and went through it from beginning to end. An hour later, Ida May closed the last folder and looked up. "We're ready," she said. They scheduled the press conference for the following Thursday, 1 week away. For the first time since the door came down, Matteo allowed himself to exhale. He called Stella that night, didn't tell her details, operational habit even now, but she heard something different in his voice, and she said, "It's happening, isn't it?" He told her yes. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "I love you, Daddy." He told her he loved her too, and held the phone for a second after she hung up, just holding it. Joshua made dinner that night. Proper dinner. Pork chops and rice, and the collard greens he only made when something was worth celebrating. They ate at the kitchen table and talked about other things for the first time in weeks. Old things, good things. Joshua told a story about Matteo's mother that made them both laugh. The plywood over the door frame was still there, but somehow, that night, it seemed smaller. 2 days passed. Then Wednesday night came. Matteo's phone rang at 9:47 p.m. Desiree Rashner. He answered immediately. Her voice was tight in a way he had only heard twice in 15 years. The voice she used when something had gone genuinely, irreversibly wrong. "The operation is compromised," she said. "Someone leaked. Shared interagency database. 3 of our primary targets got tipped overnight. They're moving assets, shutting down communication channels. Federal prosecutors are on the phone with me every 30 minutes. Matteo stood up slowly. "The leak," he said. "Where did it originate?" A pause. "Same database access point as your address manipulation." The room went very still. "Desiree, if you hold that press conference tomorrow, whoever did this runs. Everything disappears. Your case and ours." Her voice was quiet, final. "Matteo, you have to pull it." He stood alone in the kitchen for a long time after the call ended, staring at the plywood, at the raw wood edges, at the rectangle of darkness beyond it where a solid door used to be. His phone rang again. "Ida May," he told her. All of it. The silence on her end lasted 5 full seconds. "Matteo." Her voice was careful and fierce at the same time. "If we pull back now, they will use this moment to destroy everything we built." Neither of them spoke. The clock on the microwave read 10:14 p.m. Matteo didn't call Ida May back that night. He sat at the kitchen table after she hung up, and he looked at the case files spread in front of him, and he thought. That was all. He didn't pace. He didn't pour a drink. He just sat in the quiet of the house and let his mind work the way it had been trained to work, methodically, without panic, following each thread to wherever it led. Joshua had gone to bed at 10. The connecting door was slightly open, the way it always was, and Matteo could hear the low murmur of the old man's television through the wall. Some late-night program. The sound of it was almost comforting. Almost. The clock on the microwave read 11:23 p.m. He opened his laptop and pulled up the database records he had been building for weeks. The address manipulation. The timestamp. The login ID. He had been thinking about these as evidence of Parvin's harassment. A lieutenant using his access to the system to punish a neighbor who filed a complaint against him. That was what it had looked like from the beginning. But that wasn't what it was. He pulled up a city map on his screen, found his address in Pinewood Estates, found the trafficking operations confirmed Crestwood distribution point, a warehouse on the eastern edge of the neighborhood that Matteo's team had been watching for 6 weeks. He measured the distance with his cursor. 4 blocks. He sat back in his chair. 4 blocks between his front door and one of the most active drug distribution points in the entire 14-month investigation. He drove past that warehouse sometimes without thinking about it. It was part of the neighborhood, part of the background. He had never connected it to himself because there was no reason to. He was undercover. His identity in the system was clean. Nobody in that network knew who he was or what he did for a living. Except someone inside Crestwood PD did. Someone with high-level database access. Someone with the ability to run a federal agent's address, cross-reference it with department records, and understand exactly what it meant to have an FBI agent living 4 blocks from an active distribution point. Mateo leaned forward slowly. The raid wasn't harassment. It was removal. Someone had looked at the database, found Mateo Dashner at that address, understood the proximity, and made a decision. Get him out. Get him arrested, discredited, suspended. Anything that removed a federal agent from a 4-block radius before he stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to find. Parvin was sent to do the job. The fabricated tip, the database manipulation, the whole constructed apparatus of the raid. It was an operation. A deliberate, calculated operation designed to neutralize a threat before the threat knew it was one. Parvin hadn't done this on his own. Parvin was muscle. Parvin was the boot through the door. He didn't have the database sophistication or the strategic thinking to construct something this layered. Mateo opened the intelligence leak report Desiree had referenced on the phone. He had a partial copy through his federal access. The preliminary trace showing the shared interagency database access point. He looked at the timestamp. He looked at the access credentials. He pulled up the address manipulation records. Same database, same access tier, different dates, but the same level of system clearance. The kind of clearance that didn't belong to a lieutenant. The kind that belonged to someone much higher up the Crestwood PD food chain. The clock read 3:07 a.m. Mateo sat very still. Russell Harmon had been chief for 9 years. He had database access to everything. Department records, shared interagency files, the Joint Task Force intelligence system that the FBI and Crestwood PD had been contributing to for the last 2 years. Every surveillance update, every asset movement, every name. 4 years of intelligence leaks, Desiree had said. 4 years. Harmon wasn't just protecting Parvin. He had never just been protecting Parvin. Parvin was a tool, kept sharp and loyal through 16 years of cleared complaints and unearned promotions, deployed when something needed doing that couldn't be done officially. And Harmon was being paid, not in favors or political capital, in money, by the same network that Mateo had spent 14 months trying to dismantle. The whole picture sat in front of him now, complete and terrible and absolutely clear. Mateo picked up his phone. Desiree answered on the second ring. She had clearly not been sleeping either. "I'm not asking for more time," Mateo said. His voice was quiet, certain. The voice of a man who has found the door and knows exactly how to open it. "I'm going to solve both problems at once." A pause on her end. "I'm listening," Desiree said. "Here's how," said Mateo. Mateo laid it out for Desiree the same way he built every case. Start with what you know. Build outward from there. He told her about the 4 blocks, about the distribution point and the proximity and the way the raid made no sense as simple harassment once you understood that someone in Crestwood PD had the access and the motive to see Mateo's address in the system and understand exactly what it meant. He told her about the database access tier, the level of clearance required to manipulate the interagency records, a level that didn't belong to a lieutenant. He told her about the timeline. 4 years of intelligence leaks. Harmon's 9 years as chief. The way every buried complaint and every protected officer and every smoothly managed council appearance pointed in the same direction. Desiree was silent on the other end for so long that Mateo checked his phone screen to make sure the call was still connected. It was. "If you're right," she said finally, her voice careful and precise, "then we've had a compromised law enforcement official feeding active intelligence to a trafficking network for 4 years. And that network has been making operational decisions based on what he gave them." "Yes." Another silence. "If you're right," she said again, "I need 72 hours to build the federal case from our end. The database access logs, the financial trail, the leak timeline. I need my team to run the full trace, and I need it documented cleanly enough to hold up in federal court." A pause. "Can you keep Harmon from destroying the evidence before we get there?" Matteo had been thinking about that since 3 a.m. "Give me Horan," he said. He called Horan at 4:15 in the morning. The phone rang 6 times before the answer came. Groggy, alarmed, the voice of a man who knew that calls at this hour were never good news. "Mr. Dashner, I need you to do something for me," Matteo said. "It's completely legal. It's completely within your normal duties, and it matters more than anything else I'm going to ask you." He heard Horan sit up, heard the sheets shift. "The body camera archive," Matteo said. "You have legitimate access to the evidence room check-in system as a patrol officer. I need you to go in during your regular shift, nothing unusual, nothing that draws attention, and I need you to check the status of the footage files from the night of my raid. Then I need you to document that check-in. Timestamp it. Log it formally." "You want a paper trail?" Horan said slowly. "I want a record that those files existed and were intact at a specific time. If anyone tries to pull them or modify them before we're ready, I need that attempt logged under their credentials." Matteo paused. "You won't be doing anything except your job. But if someone in that building tries to make evidence disappear, I want their fingerprints on it in the system." Horan was quiet for a moment. "They'll come after me if this goes sideways," he said. "I know." "My daughter." "I know, Horan. I know exactly what I'm asking." Matteo kept his voice steady. "You told me you couldn't think of anything good to tell her about the night of the raid. This is the something good. This is the part where you decide what the story becomes." The silence stretched for 10 full seconds. "I'll do it," Horan said. "First thing in the morning." Matteo called Ida May at 4:30 a.m. She answered on the first ring, which told him she hadn't been sleeping either. He told her everything: the database access, Harmon, the intelligence leaks, Desiree's 72-hour window. He laid it all out without pause, without editorializing, just the clean sequential facts, the way a federal agent presents evidence, because he has learned that the truth, stated plainly, is devastating enough on its own. Ida May listened without making a sound. When he finished, she said, "You don't postpone the press conference. Ida May, you redirect it." Her voice had the particular energy of a woman who had been waiting 7 years to use a specific tool and had just been handed the exact right moment to use it. A community forum, police accountability and data practices. I invoke City Council procedure as a sitting council member. Harmon is legally required to respond publicly within 24 hours. It puts him in the open. It freezes every record in that building under public scrutiny. He cannot destroy what he cannot touch without the whole city watching him do it. Matteo sat with that. It was elegant. It was clean. It used the system's own rules as the walls of the trap. "He'll know what it is," Matteo said. "Yes," Ida May said. "He will, and he won't be able to do a single thing about it." The clock on the microwave read 4:47 a.m. The trap was set. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. Matteo was up before dawn. He had slept 3 hours, not because he couldn't sleep more, but because there was no more time for it. He made coffee, opened his legal pad to a fresh page, and worked through the day's logistics, the way he had worked through every critical operation day in 15 years, quietly, methodically, one thing at a time. Ida May filed the council procedure at 8 a.m. sharp. She called Mateo to confirm it the moment she left the city clerk's office. Under Crestwood Municipal Code, a sitting council member could invoke a community accountability forum on matters of public safety. And once invoked, the forum required a formal public response from the relevant department head within 24 hours. Harmon had no choice but to appear. The procedure was airtight. Ida May had used it twice before in 7 years, and she knew every corner of it. "It's filed," she said. "Tonight at 7. City Hall Auditorium. He has to be there." "Has he been notified?" "The clerk's office contacts him directly. He knows by now." A pause. "He'll spend the day trying to find a way around it. He won't find one." Mateo ended the call and moved to the next item on his list. He called each of the 6 complainants personally. One by one, starting with the retired schoolteacher who had documented everything and been told it didn't meet threshold. He told each of them the same thing. Tonight was the night. The forum was real. Their voices would be heard in a room that could not ignore them. He asked each one if they were still willing to stand up and be counted. Every single one said yes. He called Kimberly next. She had been at her desk since 7 a.m., and her voice had the sharp, focused quality it got when she was operating at full capacity. The version of Kimberly Bramble that Bradford Ellis had made the mistake of underestimating. "Everything is organized," she said. 6 sworn statements, the database records, the body camera footage, the FOIA stonewalling documentation, Arthur Warner's recorded testimony, and your recording from the night of the raid. I have it in chronological order, indexed with copies. A beat. If Ida May presents this the way I think she's going to present it, there won't be a person in that room who doesn't understand exactly what happened. "There won't," Mateo agreed. "Thank you, Kimberly." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Thank me tonight." The text from Horan came at 2:17 in the afternoon. Mateo was at Joshua's kitchen table reviewing the database records one final time when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, checked the archive. Files intact as of 1400 Heytuyers, logged formally. Someone tried remote access at 11:47 this morning. Couldn't get in. Access attempt is in the system. Mateo read it twice. Then he read the next line. Credentials used for the access attempt. R. Harmon, Chief Admin. He set the phone down on the table. Harmon had tried to pull the footage. Mid-morning, while the forum paperwork was being processed across town, while he was presumably preparing his public response, Russell Harmon had sat down at a terminal and tried to access and almost certainly delete the body camera archive from the night of the raid. And because Horan had logged the files formally that morning, creating an official time-stamped record of their existence and integrity, that access attempt was now sitting in the system under Harmon's own credentials like a signed confession. Mateo picked up his phone and forwarded the text to Desiree. Her response came back in under 2 minutes. "This is exactly what we needed. We're ready on our end. See you tonight." Mateo stood up. He rolled his shoulders. He looked at the legal pad in front of him. Weeks of notes, pressure points, case threads, names and dates and timestamps, and he closed it for the last time. Everything that needed building had been built. He walked through the connecting door to Joshua's side of the house. His father was standing at the bedroom mirror in his undershirt, buttoning the collar of a crisp white dress shirt. The suit was already laid out on the bed. Charcoal gray, the one Joshua had worn to his Postal Service retirement ceremony 20 years ago. It still fit. Joshua was that kind of man. He looked at Mateo in the mirror. He didn't say anything about the suit, or where they were going, or what it meant. He just reached for his jacket and said the only thing that needed saying. "I'm coming with you." Mateo looked at his father, 78 years old, jaw set, standing straight in his retirement suit, and nodded once. "Let's go," he said. The Crestwood City Hall auditorium held 300 people. By 6:45 p.m., every seat was taken. Mateo and Joshua arrived together, moving through the lobby side by side. Mateo in a dark suit, Joshua in his charcoal retirement jacket, both of them walking with the unhurried certainty of men who had already decided how this night was going to end. The 6 complainants were already inside, seated together in the third row. The retired schoolteacher caught Mateo's eye as he passed and gave him a single nod. He nodded back. Kimberly was near the front, a thick, organized binder on the table beside her, her face composed and completely unreadable, the face she wore in courtrooms. Ida May was already at the council table. Harmon arrived at 6:58 p.m., flanked by the city attorney and 2 officers in full-dress uniform. He moved through the room with his usual practiced ease, nodding to familiar faces, adjusting his jacket, projecting the kind of calm authority that had served him well for 9 years in this building. His eyes found Mateo once, briefly, and gave away nothing. He sat down. At exactly 7 o'clock, Ida Mae Tompkins called the forum to order. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room went quiet the moment she opened her mouth. The particular quiet that falls when people understand they are in the presence of someone who means every word they say. This forum has been convened under Crestwood Municipal Code, Section 14, Subsection 7, the Community Accountability Provision. She looked out at the room. "We are here tonight because the people of this city deserve to understand what happened in the Pinewood Estates neighborhood on the night of October 14th, and they are going to understand it completely before anyone leaves this room." She opened Kimberly's binder. She started at the beginning. The database records came first, the timestamp, the login ID, the deliberate manipulation of an address that redirected a fabricated tip toward an innocent man's home. She put the records on the projector screen at the front of the room, enlarged and clearly labeled, and she walked through each line with the methodical precision of a woman who had spent 4 decades making complex things impossible to misunderstand. Then the body camera footage. The auditorium watched in near silence as the recordings played. 4 angles, every second documented. Mateo on the floor, the knee on his neck, Parvin crouching close with his voice just below the camera's range, Joshua blocked in the doorway in his pajamas, the badge coming out, the room freezing, the non-apology, all of it, exactly as it happened, exactly as Mateo had said it happened. Someone in the back of the room said something under their breath. Ida Mae kept going. The 7 prior complaints came next. She named each one. She described what happened to each complainant. She named the year each complaint was filed and the date each one was closed without action. She put the closure authorizations on the screen, each one signed by the same hand. Then the sworn statements. All 6 complainants stood when their names were called. All 6 remained standing while Ida Mae read their statements into the public record. The retired schoolteacher, the grandmother, the mechanic, 3 others whose stories had been buried long enough. Then Arthur Wanner. His recorded testimony ran 11 minutes. The room listened to every second of it. A former council member describing in plain and precise language the personal visit he had received from Russell Harmon, and the pressure that visit applied, and the vote he had cast 2 days later, and had been carrying ever since. When it ended, the room was completely still. Harmon rose from his seat. He straightened his jacket. He cleared his throat. He opened his mouth to deliver the response he had been constructing all day. The same machinery he had been running for 9 years. The smooth, professional language that turned accountability into administrative procedure and made wrongdoing sound like miscommunication. He got 3 words out. The side door opened. Special Agent in Charge, Desiree Rashner, walked in with 3 federal agents. She was in her full professional bearing. Credentials visible, expression neutral. The face of the federal government arriving with paperwork. She walked directly to the counsel table. She placed the federal arrest warrant in front of Russell Harmon. He looked down at it. The auditorium went absolutely silent. "Chief Harmon," Desiree said quietly, "please, stand up." He stood, slowly, like a man who had finally run out of ground. The federal agents moved on either side of him. The handcuffs went on in full view of 300 people, 2 local news cameras, and every resident whose complaint had been buried in his desk for years. Parvin was arrested at his home 20 minutes later. In the back of the auditorium, Officer Tyrone Horan watched it all with his hands clasped in front of him. His jaw was tight. His eyes were steady. He was shaking slightly, but he was standing completely straight. For the first time in a very long time, the weeks after the arrests moved differently. Slower, cleaner, like air after a storm has passed through and taken everything dark with it. Mateo watched it unfold from the inside, the way the institutional machinery that had been running against him reversed direction and began grinding in the other way, with the same impersonal force, but toward a completely different end. Federal charges were filed against Russell Harmon within 72 hours of his arrest. The indictment ran 14 pages. Conspiracy, obstruction of justice, corruption of a public official. 4 counts of providing material assistance to a criminal enterprise. The trafficking network's Crestwood operation, the piece Harmon had been protecting and feeding for 4 years, collapsed within a week. 23 federal indictments followed. 14 months of work delivered. Harmon's attorneys tried to fight it for about 30 days. Then they stopped trying. The database records were too clean. The financial trail was too clear. Desiree's team had built a case with no gaps and no exits, and Harmon's own credentials sitting at the center of it, like a signature on a confession. He pleaded out in 90 days flat. 12 years in a federal correctional facility. He would be 73 when he got out, if he got out. The silver hair and the polished buttons and the practiced calm would not travel well. Parvin's case moved through the system with the same inevitability. Termination from the Crestwood Police Department came first. The new acting chief signed the paperwork within a week of the arrests, quietly and without ceremony. The civil rights violation charges followed. Official misconduct, the fabricated tip, the database manipulation carried out on his behalf. At 43 years old, Donnie Parvin had no pension, no badge, no career, and a court date that was going to cost him everything else. The man who had strolled into Mateo's home like he owned it now owned nothing. The city's civil rights settlement came through 6 weeks after the forum. Mateo sat at Joshua's kitchen table with the paperwork in front of him and read through it carefully, the way he read through everything. Then he picked up his pen and signed it. The settlement figure was significant, the kind of number that reflected not just what had happened to Mateo, but what had happened to every person in that city whose complaint had been filed and buried and forgotten. He donated every dollar of it to a newly established legal defense fund, the Crestwood Civil Rights Legal Fund, specifically designated for residents whose misconduct complaints had been closed without action by the former administration. Kimberly Bramble agreed to serve as the fund's first director. She called Mateo the morning after he made the donation and was quiet for a long moment before she said anything. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," Mateo said. Ida May's accountability ordinance passed the city council unanimously on a Tuesday afternoon in December. A new independent oversight board. Mandatory external review of all misconduct complaints. Body camera footage accessible by court petition within 30 days of any incident. She named it the Seven Voices Ordinance. One voice for each of the buried complaints that had finally been heard. She called Mateo when the vote came through. He could hear the quiet satisfaction in her voice. 7 years of patient, relentless work arriving at the moment it had always been moving toward. "It's a good name," Mateo said. "They earned it," she said simply. Officer Tyrone Horan received a formal commendation from the incoming acting chief, recognized for his role in preserving critical evidence during an active investigation. 6 months later, he was promoted to detective. He called Mateo the morning the promotion came through, and his voice had none of the thinness or fear that had marked every previous call. "My daughter's going to know her daddy did the right thing," he said. "She already does," Mateo told him. The new front door arrived on a Saturday morning in late November. Joshua had picked it out himself. Solid oak, deep mahogany stain, with a brass knocker centered at eye level that caught the morning light and threw it back warm and gold. It was the kind of door that said something about the person behind it. Joshua had known exactly what he wanted the moment he walked into the hardware store. Mateo held it steady while Joshua worked the hinges. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The work was straightforward, and they were both good at it. And the morning was cold and clear and quiet, in the particular way November mornings in Georgia could be. Bright and still, the kind of day that felt like a long breath after a long year. When it was done, Joshua stepped back and looked at it. "Nobody's kicking this one in," he said. They sat on the porch afterward with 2 glasses of sweet tea, side by side in the cold, watching the street. A neighbor walked past with a dog. 2 kids rode bicycles up the block. The ordinary world going about its ordinary Saturday, completely unaware of everything it had taken to get back to this moment. Joshua reached over and placed his hand on Mateo's shoulder. Mateo covered it with his own. Neither of them spoke. Justice had already said everything that needed saying. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.